Chapter 1. Life in the dirt was a lot of things, but exciting wasn't one of them. It was risky work, sure. A pack of tired kids handling volatile gas. Some of us were bound to end up stains on the ceiling. But the newbies did the grunt work, running errands, sweeping floors. By the time they hit 12 and started handling the tanks, they had 2 years under their belts. They knew the score. We'd go months without a bang, sometimes years. Me? I was classed high risk, as I cracked the tanks. But my main job, my real job, was playing with stickers. That's what I was doing the day my meter died. The day I blew my cover. It worked like this. The Decimites dropped the Gretha canisters on the rollers, way up at Sky Station. They rattled down 9 floors going through 1 round of decontamination per floor, and wound up in processing smelling of bleach. For the longest time, I thought that was how sky air smelled, all cold and shiver sharp. I'd breathe it in and picture sunbeams and crack another canister, just enough to dip my test strip. My meter would flash its verdict: 30, 50, 90% pure. I'd slap on the matching sticker: white for fuel grade, green for minor processing required, red for major. That was it. My job in its entirety. Except that day, my meter died. I stopped the conveyor, yelled, "Battery," and waited for a runner to bring one over. That was the procedure, just like if I ran out of stickers or my glove sprang a leak. I took my station at 8 and stayed there till lunch, unless I wanted a demerit, or unless my supervisor called me over, which that day he did. "That's the last one," said Myron. He tossed me a battery and watched me swap it out. "You need to go grab another rack." "Sure." I turned to go, glad for the change of pace, but Myron wasn't done with me. He let me get halfway to the door before he called me back. "Wait, Mila. Throw this out for me." He had something in his hand, curled into his fist. We were starting to draw attention. I braced myself for the worst. An old toenail, a dead mouse. But what he dropped into my palm was a twist of wax paper wrapped around something warm. Freshly chewed gum. I forced myself to smile. "Anything else, sir?" "No. Hurry back." It's funny how walking out with some lofty's chewed gum felt like victory. It's survival, I think. We all need to win sometimes, to feel like there's hope. Starting the race from behind, or below as we did, not losing our prize. That day, I didn't lose. I didn't flinch, cringe, or grimace, and I'll say it. It felt good. It felt good. Then I remembered I had to tramp all the way to the warehouse and all the way back. Like I said, dirt life was boring. Working below ground was like drifting through life in a semi-hypnotic state, one repetitive task bleeding into the next like a beat with no song. Test strip, meter beep, walk home, step step, chop veg, stir pot, chew chew, sleep. Test strip, meter beep. That day, I snapped out of it. I was crossing the B9 catwalk, high above the factory floor, the clang of my boots on steel mesh barely audible over the gong of empty canisters being loaded into the superheated sterilizing autoclaves. Fans whooshed overhead, and the heat rose to meet me, suffocating in its intensity. I didn't break stride. I stayed locked in my beat till a scream wrenched me out of it, an awful raw scream that made my ears hurt. I ran to the railing. All was chaos below, running shapes scattering in all directions. a blast door slammed. An alarm blared to life. That scream came again, and I picked out a lone shape left behind. Some kid sprawled on the floor. He forced himself to his knees, lurched forward, and collapsed again. His image swam and buckled, distorted by the heat. I realized I was panting, and in that moment, it clicked. The main autoclave had burst its lock. It stood open and roaring, white heat scorching from its chamber. I could feel it where I stood, through the soles of my boots. "Hey!" I called out, but the alarm swallowed my shout. I stomped on the catwalk and the kid flopped on his back. I couldn't tell if he saw me, but I tried again all the same. "You gotta move! Come on! Get out of there!" His sleeve caught fire. Just whoosh, and up it went. I didn't hesitate. I flew over the railing, and in that instant before I dropped, 2 thoughts flashed through my head. First, I still had Myron's gum. Second, if anyone saw me. I hit the ground running, the shock of the 20-foot drop barely registering. I attacked the flames, choking on the stench of burning wool. The guy's name tag took light and burned away. The letters glowed white as they went. Greg, his name was. Then Ree. Then nothing. Sparks danced in his eyes as he passed out. I wasn't aware of pain or of the strain on my muscles as I lifted Greg like a rag doll and flung him over my shoulder. I barely noticed my fingernail peeling back as I wrenched a locked door off its hinges. All I felt was the spit drying on my tongue and electricity in my veins. A sense of life so intoxicating, it was like a second birth. Opening my eyes on a sharp new world. I left Greg in a coffee-smelling break room, tucking someone's coat under his head, and turned back the way I'd come. I smashed the emergency box as I raced by, glass tinkling to the floor as I yanked the fire blanket free. It crackled as I pulled it over my head, streamed out behind me as I ran. The heat was like a living presence in the room, a physical force fighting me off. I fought back through a red world of fire, my shoelaces ignited, then my cuffs. Grinders glowed above me, bowing in the heat. The autoclave was a white, shuddering hulk at the center of the blaze. Its door hung open, 1,200 pounds of solid steel glowing in the heat. I took hold of the door and the pain finally registered. My palms seared to the metal, sizzling like bacon. I put my shoulder to the task and felt the skin bubble. I smelled roasting pork, and when I screamed, I could taste it. My own voice filled my head, then the shriek of grinding metal as the door began to move. Hot wind gusted past me, snapping my blanket like a flag. My eyelashes singed to nothing. Blisters rose across my cheeks. Flames danced and died on my jacket, and I choked on chemical fog, the cheap fireproof spray burning off. I hunched up my shoulders and summoned all the strength I had. I felt that electricity again, coursing through me and out of me like a current. The muscles bunched in my thighs. I growled and surged forward. The door clanged shut, and the temperature began to drop. I lowered to my knees, each breath coming easier than the last as my nanobots repaired my scorched lungs. My nanobots. I tasted copper and spat. They weren't mine. Not really. I hadn't earned them, and if I was caught with them, I'd be sunk. I glanced at the catwalk, but it was empty. 30 seconds I needed, 60 tops, and my injuries would heal over, at least to the point I could walk. At least to the point they'd go unnoticed. My skin crawled as my burns knit over, sending shivers down my spine. I licked my lips, feeling the blisters burst and heal. A shout rose in the distance, and I knew my time was up. The fire was still raging, a forklift blazing away. The air was unbreathable. full of smoke and soot. I couldn't be around here unharmed. No lie would save me from that. I heaved myself upright and took off running. I had time. Myron wouldn't miss me if I ran. I could cut through the mess hall, grab the batteries, and be back by... I stopped dead at the emergency stairs, recoiling from my reflection in the door. My face was black with soot and ash. My jacket was ruined. Zip melted, cuffs and collar burned away. I couldn't be seen like this. Myron wouldn't guess what I'd done. The idea of leaping into a fire to save a life would be as foreign to him as an outhouse. But he could still make my life plenty miserable. Dock me a week's pay. Bust me down to runner. I'd be on 10 tokens a week. A child's wage. And then? I fought down my panic, nails digging into my palms. Now wasn't the time to lose my head. All I needed was... I just needed to cover up. I darted back to the break room and found Greg still out cold, his head softly pillowed on that crumpled-up coat. With a whispered apology, I liberated the garment and lowered his head to the tile. It was quite a sensation shrugging into that coat. The fabric was old and sheep-soft, veteran of 1,000 washes, and still, it scratched my new skin, irritating my wrists and down the back of my neck. I dug my hands into the pockets and grasped at the cellophane crinkle of a cigarette packet. It felt almost alive, the way it slid against my freshly healed palm. Even the smell was overwhelming. Someone else's shampoo. The tang of their sweat. I breathed it in deeply as I buttoned myself down, wondering who they were, if they had another coat, if I could return this one without... How did you do that? What? I stopped what I was doing, the breath catching in my throat. How did you do that? Greg had raised himself on one elbow and was regarding me with something like awe. I didn't do anything. Whatever you think you saw. You were on fire. He coughed, wiped his mouth, and leaned forward. I saw you. You were burning. You were beautiful. But I thought... I glanced over my shoulder. It was a straight shot to the factory floor, across the hall and out the door. He'd seen it all. My fiery battle. My miraculous recovery? You were hallucinating, I said. I knelt and put my hand to his forehead. You're feverish. It's normal after shock. You can see things that aren't there, confuse dreams with reality. Greg shook his head, eyes dull with pain and confusion. I've never seen a dream that real. Your hair was like streaming out, all on fire. I laughed. Maybe he had been half-dreaming. Well, if that were true, I'd be bald. You're not bald, said Greg. You have nice hair, like the sun. As if you've ever seen the sun. I pulled down my sleeves and straightened up. Look, I've got to get back. I'm on shift and my supervisor will kill me if I don't get back. I just heard the sirens and came to check on everyone, but you're fine, so I... Don't go. Greg reached for me, then yelped as his burned arm brushed his side. He fell back, breathing hard. Somewhere above us, a door slammed open. I knelt and tried to catch his eye. Greg, he moaned, barely conscious. I slapped him. Not hard, just enough to force his eyes open. He needed to hear this. Greg. What? What you said before, about me being on fire? I leaned in, lowering my voice as boots thundered down the stairs. You can't repeat that to anyone, okay? Anyone asks what I was doing. You heard the sirens. Greg coughed again and winced. You came down, then you... That's good. You've got it. Don't try to talk. I smoothed the hair back from his face. It felt soft and slightly greasy. Something was stuck in it, something mint green and melted. A profound sense of unreality swept over me as I realized it was gum. Greg smiled, oblivious. "What's your—" The emergency door flew open and the containment team rushed in. The firefighters raced past us, their hoses slapping on the tile. I heard hissing and smelled bromine as they turned on their spray. One of the medics spotted Greg and called for a stretcher. The other knelt by him and I slipped past, backing toward the stairs. My high was wearing off, that bright rush I'd felt as I sprang into action, and all I could think about was making my escape.
"Mila, why are you here? You are out of bounds."
I turned to find Myron in the doorway, lips pursed in disapproval. It occurred to me I could tear that frown off his face, make him sorry. The thought didn't feel like my own. I squashed it down, sickened, and lowered my head. I just heard the sirens. I thought—
"What? You thought what?"
Myron made a tutting sound.
"You thought you'd bop down here. No training, no protective gear, and what did you do?"
I gave the only answer I could. "Nothing."
"Exactly."
His expression turned triumphant.
"You did nothing but get in the way, and I don't suppose you picked up those batteries."
"Not yet."
"Well, hop to it then, and wash your face."
He nudged me toward the stairs, and instead of resentment, I felt relief. He didn't know. He hadn't seen. No one had, maybe. They'd all run when the autoclave blew, holed up behind the blast doors. Only Greg could betray me now, and I didn't think he would. I'd saved him, after all, from certain death. No way he'd snitch after that. I paused at the top of the stairs to collect myself. My high had worn off, and I'd broken out in a cold sweat. A flash of gold caught my eye as I wiped it away. The coat I had stolen was identical to my own, except someone had sewn a smiley face to the cuff. I found myself smiling back.